All right, Mr. Procopio, so glad to have you on the show.
Good to be here.
Popular figure in many circles these days, and I'm excited to be able to chat with you today, bring you on the program, and talk a little bit about generational development.
Yeah.
You have a very unique story, very unique background. I'm excited to dig into that and have you tell us a little bit more about your story and educate us all, really, at the end of the day. Um, Before we jump in, I want to always do a little bit of house cleaning, housekeeping, and just let everyone know that you can always subscribe to what we're doing at Transforming Cities over at transformingcities.io. We do a weekly newsletter where we do a lot of recaps, discuss marketing topics. You can listen and watch to all of our podcasts and our live events like this on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. So go ahead and subscribe. Give us a 5-star review if you enjoy the content. That's really helpful for us. And if you know a great guest, someone else like Mike who's doing awesome things in the industry, development, bright marketing minds, shoot me a DM, send me an email. I'd love to hear more. And then finally, Transforming Cities and Transforming Cities Live is brought to you by my company at Authentic. We build premier brand and marketing solutions in the multifamily space. AuthenticFF.com is the website for that. All right, so today's live. Michael Procopio, big deal. I'm really honored to have you on the program. Today we're going to dig into generational development and sort of the family business. And you've been on a couple of podcasts I've been able to catch in the last year. There's a lot of stuff to dig into here, and I know that this conversation may go in a couple different directions, but that's why I'm excited to have you on the show. So we're at a minimum going to be covering that first gen. You have some cool stories around that, scaling that family enterprise over the decades, what that transition has been like generationally speaking. And then I know that you have a lot of great thoughts around the future of the Procopio companies and what comes next. For those of you that are listening in, watching live, we have a dedicated Q&A section at the end. So feel free to add your comments in as we go. Shoot over a message, comments, and then obviously we'll have the dedicated Q&A time at the end. If you want to hold questions, you can fire them off towards the end of our conversation. So we'll try to get to all those depending on how many come in. So let's kick things off. I would love to dive into this like initial story. And you told me this a few weeks ago, and I guess I hadn't wrapped my head around this, but I know that so months ago now, you posted this photo and I thought it was the coolest thing. And I was like, you guys need to get a truck. You need to get a truck like that, restore it, get the same lettering on there. So I
You're
know
such a
that
you're such a marketing guy.
I'm such a marketing guy, but like I know it starts earlier. There's stories earlier than this truck, so let's
Yeah.
start there. Like Gen 1, what is that all about?
Yeah. So this picture actually is 1950. So I'll get some context and then I'll go back. So um, this picture is 1950. It's in East Boston, Massachusetts. And you have a 1950 GMC pickup truck that you talked about, and you have my great grandfather wearing what appears to be pretty snazzy dress pants and an undershirt,
Yep.
working on a foundation. He's standing on the foundation of a building we were building in East Boston in the 50s. So going back, so the first, so we're technically, I'm third generation of ownership. I'm currently the CEO. I'm a principal. I own the business with my brothers. My grandfather founded the business, so he's technically first generation, but one of his first employees, who then worked for us for 40 years, was my great grandfather, right? So we're always in this weird spot of like, are we third generation or are we fourth generation? Because definitely four generations have worked in the business. But the story is really cool. So I mean, my great grandfather Frank, who's in this picture, right, was born in 1898 in Italy. He was in the Italian army in World War One, which, if you know anything about the Italian army in World War One, was very outdated. It was very antiquated. He was a cavalryman. This is where the comment about horses and swords came from on LinkedIn. He literally, served in World War One as a mounted cavalryman on a horse with a sword. Right. I mean, this is how far back this goes. Emigrated to the United States in the 1920s. My grandfather was the first of the kids born here, right? So his older brothers and sisters were born in Italy. My grandfather was born here, had a tremendous amount of opportunity because of that. because he was sort of the little translator. He was fluent in
Right.
Italian. He was fluent in English. He was born here. He was kind of saturated in the American way before the rest of the family, and as a result of that, had a lot of opportunity and a lot of drive. He was that real entrepreneurial guy. I'm you know I'm a business guy. I'm a real estate guy. I don't really consider myself an entrepreneur, right? Entrepreneurs kind of go attack different things at different times and different businesses. That was my grandfather, right? Had a
Mm.
fruit cart, had a snowmobile dealership, had a millwork business, had the construction business, had a real estate brokerage business. He was a real entrepreneur. He whatever need he saw that he thought he could fill better than someone else, he attacked that. And that's really, I think, common with Gen 1 across kind of these longer
Yeah.
multi-generational family businesses.
Yeah, I love that, and I know that you probably have a lot of stories about that first generation, and to be clear, I think it counts that he hired your great grandfather to
Yeah.
extend into that fourth generation. I think that's a really
Yeah.
cool story. Let's talk about some
Yeah.
of
I,
that.
I remember as a kid, I remember as a kid, my great grandfather, right, in his 80s, standing on staging, nailing siding on houses.
Oh wow,
Yeah. I mean, that's
that's really
crazy. It's,
cool.
it's, it's, cra-
Yeah,
it's crazy when you think
it
about
is
that. It's a
crazy.
long time.
That's a long time. Let's talk about then the some of the transition that occurred. So we had that cool truck in the previous photo, and thank you again for sharing some of these sort of family photographic heirlooms at this point. Really cool stuff. And by the way, being the marketing guy I am, I love seeing the changes of the lettering for Procopio over the years. Like
Yeah.
I subtly noticed that on all of these photos. So kudos to the Procopio companies for keeping the brand out there in the front.
These everything you're seeing here was hand painted. So now we're in a
Exactly.
really different era,
Yeah.
right? Hand lettering.
So I think you mentioned something like from year 1 to year 65 or whatever, there's a lot that happened in the sort of the scaling phase of the Procopio companies. Can you dive into that? Because it wasn't just like you didn't start, your family did not begin at multifamily development. There
Yeah.
is a long history there. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, we started in the construction business as most people do, right? My grandfather was a small contractor, right? He started building additions and things like that, and then progressed to building houses for people, and progressed to building large scale single family subdivisions. In the 60s and 70s, we did build a bunch of apartment product, and then he went right back to the single family product, which we built right through the 2000s,
Mm,
really until my brothers and I came on the scene and made the shift to the multifamily kind of permanent. But there's a lot of evolutions that you go through those 65 years, right? In the 1970s, we added the real estate brokerage business because, frankly, as an entrepreneur, my grandfather was sitting down looking at it and saying, "Why am I paying someone else 6% to sell the houses I'm building? I'll open my own brokerage company." We ran that. We still actually have that. We're wrapping that up this year, but that's a business that's gone on for 45, nearly 50 years in its own right.
mm,
In the 80s, this picture that you have here, in the 80s, we basically decided to start our own site work division, and for the same reasons. We thought it could be accretive to the subdivisions. We were doing large land development subdivisions of single families. They're very site work intensive, road building, utilities, foundations, blasting, all that kind of stuff. And that evolved the business further as we started self-performing site work. We still self-perform site work today, right? This is still a key piece of our business. It's accretive on almost
yeah.
every deal we do. Probably 50% of the deals that we're doing, our team is doing the site work because we're not kind of your average everyday developer. We still self-perform construction management. We self-perform the site work, and those things combine to be really accretive for our investors.
Yeah.
These are great pictures. I mean, that's
These
like,
are awesome
these are all
pictures.
from the 80s. These are all from the 80s. This is my grandfather on the right, my great uncle Frank on the left. Both of them have since passed away. This is working on a large commercial project in Saugus, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. Um, that
So
was
we're
that was
moving we're moving from site work here
Yep,
to some of the other projects that you worked on,
yep.
larger scale projects like
Yep,
this
larger
one. Really
larger
cool.
scale. There's a big institutional commercial building, and they ran the business from the 50s. My grandfather passed away in 2005. My uncle retired in 1998 ish, 98 or 99. Frank retired. My grandfather passed away in 2005, and then Frank just actually passed away this past year. So that generation is gone. But for 60 plus years, they were the drivers, and they were in their own right very entrepreneurial,
Yeah.
very much willing to shift gears and adapt and grow the business in their own way, differently than we have,
Yeah.
but very entrepreneurial.
Well, let's talk about let's dig into sort of some of the things that you're doing differently now, because
Yeah.
I think one of the stats that you gave me when we spoke a few weeks ago had to do with the generational transition when it comes to the raw data, and you said something like 2 or 3% of companies actually make it to a fourth gen.
Three
And I know
percent
you
of
have
3% of companies make it to the fourth generation.
okay,
13% of all companies make it to the third generation, and only 3% make it to the fourth generation. So the
so how
vast,
did
vast majority fail. And they fail on the generational transitions.
And so tell me a little bit about your personal experience with that generational transition. And if you would, we have some cool photos here too. I would love
Yeah.
to get your commentary on those as we click through them as well.
Yeah, for sure. So the business went through a couple of generational transitions. So in 2005, when my grandfather passed away, the business transitioned to my dad and my uncle. They were the only siblings active in the business. And that the business then ran from 2005, when my grandfather passed away, to 2016, when my brothers and I bought the business. My dad and my uncle were running the business, generally large scale single family development, higher end. I would still call them middle market homes, but they were building homes for doctors and lawyers and kind of people that could afford a kind of a really nice house, but they weren't building, they weren't building $6 and $8 million houses for people. They were still kind of everyday houses in and around Boston, mostly on the North Shore. The next transition, so Gen 1 to Gen 2, frankly, was brought about by death, right? Which is not uncommon. Gen 1 generally doesn't voluntarily transition a business early. It's very, very unique if that were to happen. So my grandfather passed away. It was circumstances that transitioned the business. My dad and my uncle had to kind of sort out all the issues around that and run the business over the ensuing decade. When my brothers and I came in, we worked in the business. I came into the business in 2000. My brothers shortly thereafter, or my brother Greg shortly thereafter, and then Mark. Mark worked outside the business for a while. He's recently come in. But the transition from Gen 2 to 3, or 3 to 4, however you want to look at it, was much more planned. It was a transaction. It was a buyout. My dad and my uncle are still here, right? It wasn't brought about by death or disability or divorce or kind of any of these other negatives that cause chaos in family business transition. So when you have the ability to really plan a transition and understand, how are we going to transition control of the business? How are we going to transition ownership of the business? How are we going to make sure that the assets of the business are protected as they transition across these generations, especially if there's shifts in business strategy, which was very clear when my brothers and I were coming in, that we weren't going to continue building the single family homes. We had a book of business that we were going to wrap up and contracts that we were going to make good, but our focus had shifted completely to large scale multifamily development. We saw tremendous opportunity there. We really saw the future of our company in that direction, and we went hard after it. And really, what I'll say about the generational transitions is there's a direct correlation to the amount of preparation, the amount of counsel, the amount of conversations, the amount of transparency that you put into that, and how smooth that transition is going to go.
Mm-hmm.
That is where family businesses fail, is on the generational transitions. Expectations are unspoken, expectations are unclear, and really, the more you can talk and the more you can together plot that course and that transition in a way that works for everyone, the better off you're going to be. And we were very lucky to work with my dad and my uncle, who wanted to transition it, had a very clear plan in place for what they wanted and what they needed, and we were able to work within that framework to do something that worked for everybody.
I have to imagine, with regards to expectation, accountability, even how much people are being paid, what the requirements are of the roles that they are staying in and or transitioning to. There's a lot of things there that could get messy. How did you approach that?
Yeah, you honestly have to, a legal pad. And every time I ran into something that was really messy and didn't strike me as right, I wrote it down and I said, I have to address this, right? We were that family business where every owner was paid the same. Oh, you're an owner? Here's your salary. Well, you know what? That's not what we are today. Your ownership of the business has absolutely no bearing with what job you do in the business or what you get paid. You get paid for a role in the business. We professionalize the organization. So if you're an owner and happen to be a project manager, you're paid as a project manager.
Mm.
Now, you might get profits interest as an owner. You might have some say in operations from the ownership perspective, but you're a project manager, right? And that's very challenging in many family businesses. That's a huge hurdle in most cases as part of professionalizing the business, right? It has to be very deliberate and very thoughtful. And those conversations are not easy. They are often very painful. But in hindsight, without professionalizing the business, there's no enterprise value, right?
Yeah.
When you continue, we were continuing to run the business today, and it's not a negative, right? My grandfather and by and large my dad and uncle ran this business as a lifestyle business. It was not designed around enterprise value or the company value per se. It was, how does this business impact my lifestyle, and how can the business support my lifestyle? If we were still running the business that way today, we wouldn't be functional. We would not. You cannot be functional as a large scale organization, be impactful in the world and in your industry if it's just going to be run as, and there's no right or wrong answer, but the ownership and the executive team needs to understand, here's what we want out of the business. We want it to be a lifestyle business. Great. Then run it like a lifestyle business. But if you want it to be a professional organization and you want to drive culture and you want to drive professionalism and you want to drive impact, that's a different thing. And you better get those ducks straightened out and do it in a very transparent way so that everybody's on board.
You've always struck me as someone who speaks very confidently about these topics, and maybe it's just simply because you've grown up in it and around it, and you've been a part of it now for so long. I think back to the first time that I actually reached out to you, which was probably about a year ago now, and we had a quick conversation, a Zoom call, just introducing one another, really just me introducing who I was to you. And one of the things that you were telling me about was, like executive leadership groups that you had been a part of over the years. And I'm curious how much of an impact getting advice and insight from those outside of the industry who are also a part of family businesses has impacted the way that you run the Procopio companies, or the way that you look at Procopio companies now.
Absolutely. There has been no greater single influence in my leadership and my ability to transition this business than the family business peer group that I'm a part of. I've been a part of a couple of them over the years. The one I'm currently part of is relatively exclusive. My current group is there's only 7 guys in it. They're all, multi-generational family businesses. They're all executives in the family business. They're all dealing with the same issues. That support, that knowledge base, some of them much, much larger businesses than mine, that knowledge base, that sounding board, that kind of personal board of directors, board of advisors that's highly competent in what I'm about to do has been invaluable. And I think, again, this comes with generational transitions, right? It's not a criticism of previous generations. That is not something that ever would have been done in a previous generation. Previous generations were much more insular. They were much more apt to say, I know what I'm doing. Don't get in my way. I don't need to think outside of my box. And many times they were right. They were wildly successful with that type of a mindset. I think as you start to stretch out the generations and you start to grow a business, at least from my perspective, you start to be keenly aware of what you don't know. And if you're an effective leader, you're going to seek out that knowledge. You're going to seek out that base on which to build the business. This is actually a funny picture to put up here, because this is late 80s or early 90s, and it shows the level. Like right now, we got almost 50 team members. We have executives. We've got a whole bunch of white collar people. But this is my dad and my uncle. My dad's on the right with that like popped collar. I don't know what the deal is with that. My uncle's on the left. This is like the late 80s or early 90s. They're not in the office. They don't have white shirts on. There's no ties involved. They are physically, there's a Stilson wrench in my dad's hand. They're changing the cutting edge blade on a bulldozer, right? Like themselves. This is the evolution of the business, right?
Mm-hmm. And you're not going to go out after this conversation and change blades on site?
Well, I might.
Okay.
And to be fair, we were just telling some of our team that some of the team was questioning some of my input on some decisions we were making in a project. And Greg, my brother, reminded them that it wasn't that long ago that I was an on-call maintenance guy in our projects, right? So I've done my share of changing disposals and toilets and understanding what you do and don't want from a maintenance perspective. But this is interesting because this evolution of the business is what built the foundation for what we have today. We couldn't have parachuted into this and just said, well, I'm going to be a white collar real estate developer in the multifamily space. Everything I do today came from this background, right? It came from working in the dirt. It came from operating an excavator. It came from working on a framing crew. It came from working on a finish crew. It came from being a real estate agent in the real estate brokerage. I've done all of those jobs, as have my brothers by and large. And that's what builds kind of the, maybe not jack of all trades, but a breadth of knowledge that makes us a particularly nimble, particularly dangerous developer,
Yeah.
right? We didn't just go to a real estate course at Northeastern and pop off and say, hey, we're going to be real estate development guys and raise some money. This is this is in our DNA. This is what we've grown up doing. And by and large, until the past couple of years, did it with our own balance sheet and our own capital.
Well, I want to get to the future of the Procopio companies and some of the projects that you're working on now or have in planning. But before I do that, I want to kind of put a bow on this part of the conversation with regards to this generational transition and just family business in general. And I would like to ask you a broad question, and feel free to answer it however you want to take this. But for anyone listening, or for anyone that catches this later on who is in a similar sort of family business ecosystem, and they're seeking guidance, and maybe they don't know where to look, they don't know where to turn, what would be your top one or two recommendations for that person listening who needs some help?
So I would make that twofold. I would say understand what you don't know. Don't wing it, right? These are, when you're transitioning a family business, one of the really challenging things to unpack and understand is that there's real relationships at stake, and it's more important than just the numbers. Right? If I was a venture capitalist, I could assess a business on the numbers. I can make a business transaction, decide what I want to pay for a business, what I don't want to pay for a business. And I really wouldn't care about anybody's feelings. But you know what? I spend the holidays at my dad's table still. I visit my uncle. I spend New Year's at my uncle's, right? Like this, you want to preserve those relationships. So there is a tendency to, at many times, especially on younger generations, myself included, to fly off a little half cocked with how you want this to unfold. Understand that there's a broader perspective. There's more impacts than are seen in most other businesses. And I would say, understand what you don't know. I would tell people to read. There are a ton of great opportunities out there in terms of business books that are key to transitioning business and understanding how to professionalize a business. Enterprise Value is a great example of one. Good to Great. There's many, and if people follow me on LinkedIn, I am constantly spitting out book ideas and recommendations for people. And then I would say get the appropriate counsel that you need. There were very few things that were more difficult for us in some of our transitions and some of our growth than paying really high-priced lawyers and really high-priced consultants and really high-priced accountants. It's a really hard hill to get over, but the reality is they're critical to doing this professionally. They're critical to making sure that all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, all of the various expectations are being met, all of the various constituencies are being heard. These are really complex things because at the core of it, it's not business, it's family. Right. Yeah. And especially for me, I can credit my dad and my uncle with this. I can credit with my grandfather and my great uncle with this. Family was what was first. And that doesn't say that doesn't happen all the time, but by and large, family was incredibly important to them. And I can speak for myself. The decisions we make in the business today are secondary to the decisions we want to make for our families. And I think that's really important perspective for people to keep in mind.
Yeah, I love that. Well, let's pivot into this final bucket of the discussion. I would love to chat about today, and that is the future of the Procopio companies. I am very fortunate to be a part of some of these stories. There's this project that we are looking at here, this beautiful project here that is now called the Alice. So stoked that you brought Authentic in on this job. But this sort of revolves around what it is your views are on hospitality, multifamily, and sort of community building, for lack of a better word, that has not necessarily always been the story of the Procopio companies. So looking to the future, forward looking, like where is it headed next? Where is Procopio companies headed next?
Yeah, so I would say there's two big buckets. First of all, we're no longer just kind of regional or very hyper local. We're pursuing work in North Carolina markets. We're pursuing work in North Florida markets. We're pursuing work in Alabama and Texas, and we have kind of a much broader view of where we want to work. I would say our product types would fall into a couple of buckets, and that's for a reason. So continuing down the track of multifamily, and then we see significant growth and opportunity in build for rent single family developments. They operate as what we would call horizontal multifamily. They're small, efficient single family homes, but they are rentals. They're all rentals. They're a single tax plot, and they're really in high demand. We think there's a significant growth opportunity there. The desire to be a homeowner in the United States has shifted dramatically over the past 20 years. It's really a profound shift in mindset as homeownership relates to the American dream. And most of our residents are residents by choice. It's not financial circumstances because they want flexibility and they want hospitality in their lifestyle. We have a very unique view of being a landlord, being a multifamily operator. Our view is it's more akin to being a boutique hotel operator than it is to being an apartment operator. And if we can break that mindset of I just operate an apartment building, which is the traditional property management mindset, and we can operate in a hospitality mindset where my number one focus is on my residents' experience with me. If you think about the experience you have when you check into the Ritz-Carlton or the Four Seasons or even like a Marriott Autograph boutique hotel, the fact that they know your name, the fact that they know your preferences, the fact that they greet you, the fact that they help you, that they carry things for you, that they press the elevator button for you when you're walking in, those small touches go a long way. We're also very focused on creating community. That's a buzzword everybody says. But the data shows us that in a multifamily building, if a resident has two people in the building that they consider a friend, by whatever definition, if they have two people that they consider a friend, they are 50% more likely to renew their lease, and they are willing to pay 20% more in rent because they have two friends, right? That tells us a couple of things. Number one, it tells us that the loneliness epidemic in the United States is very real, and COVID hasn't helped that. And it tells us that whatever we can do as an operator to bring people together authentically, right, for shared experiences, for shared friendship, to build real, genuine community relationships, we will have less turnover. We will have higher rents. There's a business case for it. There's also a people case for it, right?
Right.
We will have happier, more productive, more successful residents because of that experience. That's the model that we want across those business types. And that's what we're pursuing kind of with our overall brand as we pursue bigger and bigger projects in different areas.
Something that has always struck me too about the work that you do, even before we were able to work together, and you've been growing sort of the in-house marketing team over the years as well, is your attention to detail when it comes to design, when it comes to branding properties and creating a little bit more of a holistic experience for that renter. And before we jump to this next project that we'll sort of talk about here, I just want to capture your thoughts on the importance of that brand and the brand identity and the experience, because more and more, I feel like progressive developers and owners and operators are getting on this train of that stuff really does matter, and it does make a difference, not only to my bottom line and the ROI, but to your point, like it makes sense to bring people together that have a shared cause and a shared vision for how they see their next living situation playing out. And it seems to me that brand and attention to detail in design matters a lot. But what do you think? I don't want to too much there.
It's tremendously important, right? You've had the opportunity to work with our team. You know that we're in some ways we're a little different. We're not, I wouldn't say we're micromanagers, but you're right. We care about the details in this stuff, and we get very hyper focused on how we name projects and how we brand them and how we integrate that into the surrounding community, and what does the name represent, and does it tie to the community roots, and are people that live there going to actually resonate? It's a very strange concept, but are they actually going to resonate with the building they live in? And what we found is that they actually do, right? And there's a big difference between thoughtfully branding a boutique product and then backing that up with hospitality and just naming a building 635 Main Street.
Right.
Which is frankly how this industry worked for 75 years, 80 years, more, right? Yeah. It was just, here's your address. You don't need a brand, right? Thoughtful branding, thoughtful design. We are very careful to tie three elements together: branding, design, but specifically interior design, amenity design and programming, and hospitality/operations. Those three things, if we can get those right, we will outperform every other asset in the market. There's no doubt.
Yeah. And that, I think that dovetails nicely into this project. So I would love for you to kind of jump into this because this speaks to exactly what you're saying. There, I mean, we're not inside the building in this rendering, but you can imagine this building has a vibe, it has a feel, it has an atmosphere about it. I mean,
It's
there's
got a
community.
vibe, all right.
It's got a vibe for sure, right? And that's going
Yeah.
to attract a certain set of people different than the previous project, the Alice.
Yeah.
So walk us through this project. I know you're excited about this one as we
Yeah,
begin
so
to
this is
wrap up.
Paragon Dunes. This is a mixed use project in a Boston beach community. So this is on a thin neck of land. You can see off of the one side in this rendering, you can see the bay. You can see a marina. There's a restaurant over there. But off to the right, what you can't see, where you see is a parking lot. That's the parking lot for the beach. So on the right hand side of that is a huge sandy beach, one of the nicest beaches south of Boston. And what this is a multifamily building that clearly has a vibe. You can see that it's got a roof deck. It's colorful. It's got this sawtooth design so that nearly all the units have ocean views. And then you have, if you go back to that previous slide real quick, you have this activated elevated beer garden in the middle. And then on the left-hand side, you have this hospitality building. This is restaurant. This is arcade. This is kind of the stuff that you would see, function center, what you would see kind of in these New England, mid-Atlantic, coastal kind of boardwalk communities. And we really think there's a unique opportunity here to really have some effective placemaking with the right operator there that's going to run this as a venue, run the beer garden, run the events, run the restaurant operations. The multifamily augments it, but what we've really advocated for here and sought to create here is a really unique destination point where people want to
Right.
go. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And
You can see this little beach retail underneath that podium piece there. You can see the beer garden up on top. There's pocket parks in there. You get a really good look here at kind of one of the ways we looked at design on this with this sawtooth design on the building. That's maximizing the balconies, maximizing the views for people. This is really, it's ocean on both sides. So it's really a remarkable piece of land. And
I think it speaks to the lonely, like to me, it immediately addresses the loneliness problem.
Yeah.
So if I'm a resident and I come here and I can either be on my balcony and kind of chill out with a friend or like see what's going on down there, or I can just go down there myself and go to the arcade or grab a bite or mingle with friends or walk over to the beach. I mean, this is really cool stuff, and it's interesting to see how. And I hadn't actually thought about this until we started talking about it right now, Mike, but it ties together so many of the elements that you have been speaking to on the live today with regards to design, brand, loneliness, experience, community building. This checks all the boxes.
Yeah, for sure. We are as excited about this project as any project we've ever done. It's a really incredible location as real estate guys, but more than that, it's a really incredible opportunity for all those reasons that you said. We have focused in on the design to the point where we're shrinking units beyond where people think is reasonable. We're saying, no, we don't want people to hang out in their units. We want people to sleep in their units.
Yeah.
We want people to work in the community. We want people to play in the community. We want people to be outside. We want them to be together. We want them to be enjoying experiences. We will take the lead and we will curate those experiences. But what we found is that people are willing, from a business perspective, people are willing to pay for this. This isn't that it has to be, altruistic, that we're going to run at a loss or we're going to run at a higher expense ratio than our peers. The exact opposite is true. There's a business case for treating people right, solving the real problem they have, which I would argue is loneliness right now and lack of meaningful connection with people. You solve those, you kind of have a resident for life. You have a person that doesn't want to leave your community because you've given them something real and tangible, and it goes beyond four walls and a roof where they sleep.
Mm-hmm. I think that's said very well. And I think that's a great stopping point as we get to the end of our initial conversation here and dive into some of the Q&A. Again, everyone, thanks for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having Mike on with me. I would love to dive into some of these Q&As here. One came in from Dakota who asks, what are some of the challenges you are seeing in terms of just developing projects at large, given the state of the industry right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. I don't have a crystal ball. I would say the challenges that we're seeing right now generally are around capital markets, particularly on the equity side. Boston is particularly well banked. We have 10 active projects in Boston. We still get consistently good term sheets from lenders here. However, the equity has been very challenging. We're in a further business evolution where we're about to go out and raise our first fund. We've raised a lot of money. We've raised hundreds of millions of dollars from syndicates or from individual institutional investors into the projects. We're about to go raise a fund, actually a pair of funds, a regular fund and an opportunity zone fund. We believe that's the next evolution for us, but it's challenging right now, right? Equity is on the sidelines. Institutional investors are keeping their powder dry. It's very challenging to get projects done. I would say from a regulatory perspective, we're also still seeing significant NIMBYism. People don't want the projects. We're seeing, we just had a project that we went to the city council on. I won't mention which one, and they inserted a very obvious poison pill into the approval. They approved it to be able to say they approved it, but basically put a poison pill in that makes the project an unbuildable project. So this kind of stuff continues, especially in the Northeast. It's not really prevalent in other parts of the country. You talk about the Sun Belt in Florida, North Carolina. It's a lot easier to develop there. Texas, especially the Dallas markets. But here, that remains a significant challenge to get deals that work.
Joseph, and I thought this was great. I almost pulled it up as we were talking about this, but he mentions, is it morphing the business entrepreneurial in nature? Which I thought that too, but you sort of said the opposites. But so how do you further explain that?
Yeah, it is. I don't know. And maybe I define an entrepreneur wrong. I think of entrepreneurs as those people that they've kind of got the golden touch. They can make any business work, and they just kind of are radically good at creating new things and understanding problems. Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, we've morphed the business. We've evolved the business significantly. There's a lot of times where we have to explain to people that we're nearly a 75-year-old business, but in a lot of ways we're a startup because the business we're in today, we've only been in for 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. So I haven't been building multifamily buildings for 75 years. We've had a lot of experience over those years, and there's a lot of institutional knowledge there. But it is very much a different culture and a different mindset.
Another question that kind of relates to some of that transition is, and you touched on this a bit with regards to sort of having a good sort of consultant group around you, but as you transition the business from that lifestyle focus to more of a professional focus, how much of that balance was figuring out with your family versus needing to bring in outside help to help you figure it out with the family, if that makes sense?
I would say a good blend, even probably 50-50, right? I needed a lot of support as the guy driving that bus. I needed a lot of support. Now, does that mean that at every family meeting or every conversation with my dad and my uncle and my brothers, I had a consultant there? No. In fact, the opposite. The consultant usually wasn't there. But I needed that support. I needed the peer group. I needed the consultants. I needed to understand what I was dealing with kind of in the four corners of that box in which to operate. But I would say that the most important thing in that entire process is the mindset going into it. This is what I want to do and why. And once you've got that why figured out, the rest of it can fall into place, right? The rest of it will be easy. If it's just, I think we should do this for no particular reason, there's no benefit here, well, no one's going to be on board with that.
Right. Another one came in here from Tracy, obviously giving you some kudos here for the history and points about the resident retention. She says that the resident experience is critical, and I agree that branding, interior design, and hospitality is what separates you from the rest. You mentioned that this approach really sort of blows the competition out of the water and sort of sets Procopio companies apart. Why do you think that other groups are not on board with this brand first, experience first, renter first approach, and they would rather call it 635 Main?
Yeah, I think some groups are. I think by and large, this is challenging to do at scale. And that is a challenge that we're facing, right? It's challenging. It's really challenging to do it at scale. It's also going to be challenging for us. We do not property manage in-house. We use third parties. It's going to be very difficult to execute through a third party. So we will be forced at some point into a corner where we either have to build a property management platform that can execute the hospitality model, or we're going to be in the position, which is likely in the short term, of putting our people, there's a property manager, maybe there's 5 staff members on a project of whatever, 250 units or 300 units. And one of those is actually a Procopio hospitality employee. And their responsibilities are to drive that bus on that asset. It's challenging to do at scale. In this business, there's a lot of institutional ownership. And that institutional ownership is somewhat parochial in their view that you drive costs down, drive the operating ratios down, reduce costs, increase NOI. We're always positioning for the next sale. And at times, positioning for the next sale, it runs contrary to resident experience. It runs contrary to overall value. What we're saying is, if you're willing to give it time, if you do these things and invest in the hospitality, invest in the experience, you will increase NOI and you will increase value.
Mm.
Although it's counterintuitive.
I love that. I think that's a great place to stop. And Bill here kind of says it better than I can, but it does seem like you're the new poster child for the family business, and I think you've been doing a great job of that.
Thanks,
So
Bill.
I want to congratulate you on being the fourth gen here. It's been great catching up with you, Mike, and reach out to you. LinkedIn or email is probably the best spot.
Yeah, LinkedIn.
ProcopioCompanies.com.
Yep, LinkedIn absolutely is the easiest. People can feel free to email me. My email's on LinkedIn, but certainly connect with me on there. I'm very active on LinkedIn. We've seen a ton of value from that platform. I try to post in a couple of buckets, whether it's Procopio updates or leadership or cultural stuff. That's really where my LinkedIn focus is.
Yeah, I love it, and I second that and third that. It's been great following you on LinkedIn, getting to know you better, and then having the opportunity to connect and work with you and share this story and education with the world. Mike, thank you again for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Wonderful being on. Have a good one. Thanks, everybody.